those leads need to convert. We need to get them to pick up the phone. And that's one of the reasons we do content marketing in general is we are looking for a vehicle to speak directly to people, let them know who we are and make them feel good. Get them over that little bit of hump, that friction point to just set the appointment, talk to us. And I feel like every day that goes by, that path gets a little bit longer. They've got a lot of choices and there's a lot of content to compete with. But that's where I think that this medium shines is it's one of the only ways that you can really speak directly to somebody and feel really authentic. The videos have been around forever and I think they can be really impactful.
Hey, law firm owners, welcome to the Your Practice Master podcast. I'm your host, MPS, and today I'm stoked because I have the opportunity to speak with Robert Ingalls, who is going to talk to us a little bit about podcast marketing for law. And I'm really excited to get into that conversation because there's a lot of different paths we can go. But Robert, first and foremost, thank you for being on the show.
Hey, it's such a pleasure. I've listened to some of your old episodes and just some of the guests that have been on here. Mike McAllowitz is just one of my ultimate people that I've been following who has helped me so much in my business and he doesn't even know it. And so to follow people like that is just an honor.
I appreciate that. And Mike is absolutely an awesome guy. He's done a lot of exciting things in the world of business. And I'm sure a lot of people fall right into that boat where he's probably impacted people in ways he doesn't even know, which is pretty cool. So thank you for being on and looking forward to kicking in and learning a little bit more about this. But you said you've seen a few episodes, so you know probably what's coming next, which is breaking the ice a little bit. What's something that maybe not everyone knows about you?
I think most people that know me as an adult don't know that I was probably the shyest kid ever. I don't really remember this, but apparently in kindergarten, I didn't speak to my teacher until after the Christmas break. I didn't open my mouth. I was so terribly shy. And it's really surprising to people who know me as an adult because, I mean, people who will listen to this podcast will probably find out quickly it's really hard to get me to shut up now.
I love it. Well, maybe we got the title of the podcast right there, from shy to podcast expert. You wouldn't think the two go hand in hand, but here we are.
I knew I wanted to talk to people. I knew I wanted those relationships as I was growing up. And so I just learned you got to lean into the discomfort, weird thing. And I leaned in hard.
Being comfortable and being uncomfortable is good. It allows you to grow into a stronger person and I think diversifies you as a human being. So
Absolutely.
props to you for being willing to do that. And I want to hear about this a little bit. So why don't you talk us through the high level? We're doing kind of podcast production and consulting and podcast marketing for law firms right now. How did we end up here?
What a road. I guess I practiced law before I made my way into here.
Aha.
And that's why it's law pods. It was what I knew. If I learned anything in law, it was get in a niche, be the person who does the thing. And the farther down you can niche, the better. And so when I was making that pivot, I thought naturally, like, I think it's coming. And I think lawyers are going to be really late to the game. So that'll give me a head start. I was right about that. It did definitely work out that way. But from a young age, I wanted to be a lawyer. I grew up in a rural community. We lived in a mobile home when I was a child. And the idea that I could be a lawyer was just, wow, that was, you'd made it. That you had back then, a lot of the ones in my town were driving those diesel Mercedes with the hood ornament,
Right,
those
right.
leather seats. I was like, that, I mean, the height of luxury and wearing suits to court. I thought it was all so cool. And being from the community I was in, there was so much status around that. And I was like, I want that. And I was really into following criminal cases as a kid, and probably because my mom was. We watched a lot of the stuff on TV. We had a murder that made national news happen in my hometown when I was like 11 or 12. My mom she took me to watch a small portion of the case, and I was just, wow. Well, first, like, there's a guy who murdered some people right there. But watching the arguments and the whole thing was really exciting. And that kind of locked it in. I was like, I want to go do this. And I wavered into philosophy and religion in school for a short period of time, but I made my way back. And going to law school, practicing, started in criminal defense, but it was only a couple years in when I realized, like, I am not built for this. It's the kind of job that can wear on even the toughest person. And my personality, I just want to get along. In my day to day life, I want to see people who are happy to see me,
Yeah.
who I'm happy to see. None of us are ever arguing. And if we do, we're doing it like reasonable adults that want to get to the best outcome. And that is not what my day to day life was like. And it wore on me pretty bad. And then I was on the appointed list. So I ended up with a lot of really tough cases, a lot of domestic violence stuff. I have 4 sisters, I'm the only boy, so I think that made it a little harder too. I'm here championing people who I don't think are doing very good things. The things that you hear, the things that you have to do, while ethical, didn't feel good, and I made my way out of that after about 3 years and kind of moved around through different areas of law, kind of whatever I could get at the moment, just trying to find that area that worked. But damn, that conflict was just more than I wanted. But we talked earlier about leaning in. I'd learned through life, lean in. You got to lean in. Things get hard. You lean in. Other people won't. That's why you win, right? And so I leaned in. But eventually it all kind of came to a head when we started talking about having a family. And I
Mm.
went, no, like I cannot be this person and be the kind of father I want to be. And that was the moment that kind of sent me off looking. Like it just said, okay, I'm going to go look. And I found podcasting and I learned so much. I mean, within 30 days of listening to my first podcast, I owned $1,000 worth of gear. I owned this microphone. That says a lot
Nice.
about my personality. Go big or go home.
Yes.
And it took a few years before I realized, hey, I can take this hobby and do something with it. It took some time. There was a lot of struggle, but that's probably for another day.
Wow, there's a lot to unpack just right there. All right. So you actually started as a lawyer. Look, you know this. There are certain practice areas in law that can just very much take a toll, right? Between your criminal and family law. I mean, there's some tough practice areas that you have to be emotionally tough for. And so I applaud you for starting to look outside of that because I can imagine how difficult that really was. I'm curious if you don't mind me sharing. So, what did you do in the interim where you started to tinker with this idea, find podcasting and branch into where you are now?
Yeah, I ended up finding podcasting because I kind of had a little freak out when we started family planning. And I just didn't know what to do because I was overwhelmed, barely hanging on in a law career, wasn't making any money either. Like, that's something I don't think enough people in the outside world know, that
True.
if you don't know how to do it or you don't get in with a firm that teaches you, like, just try to do it yourself. It can be really difficult to figure out how to get profitable. And so on top of all that, we want to have this baby and I don't have any money. And so I sat down and made a list of things that I had to get together. Top of the list was money. And I read a money book. I read Dave Ramsey's book. That was one of
Yeah.
the first books I'd ever read that I guess you could consider personal development. It just
Mm.
wasn't something I did. And I liked that book. It got my head around some issues I didn't understand. And then I read his book, Entree Leadership, because I was doing a piss poor job of running my law office. People did whatever they wanted. And that book said, listen to our podcast. And at that point, I'd never done that. And so I go and I listen to their podcast. And then while I'm in there, I find this other podcast called Awesome Office. And Tom Bilyeu was on it, first
Mm.
episode,
Yep.
founder of Quest Nutrition. That episode blew my mind. It's the first time I'd really ever heard anybody talk about the concept of mindset and creating your life instead of being like, this is who I am, thinking, who do I want to be? And start doing those things and building that person. And I was like, oh dear, I just thought you are who you are and you do the things you do. And all of a sudden, this guy had given me license to think about anything. And I did, and I chased it. And I started, I bought all this gear. I started playing around with it in my office. I ended up starting a podcast in my law office,
Wow.
trying to talk about, at that point, estate planning. I mean, God bless all the estate planners, but it was so boring for me. And so I'm on this podcast trying to talk about estate planning and market my practice. I find myself talking about other stuff. And then I'm
Mm.
like, oh, wait, I'm supposed to be talking about this. And I'm not. I'm just talking about other stuff. And I realized, okay, this isn't really working for the law office. My passions clearly lie elsewhere. And so I broke the podcast off and just started interviewing people in town that I thought were cool and interesting, entrepreneurs. We had a local state senator that would come on almost any podcast that would ask him. So I brought him on and talked to him. I found this really unique way to talk to successful people, learn about them, and do it with a podcast that I thought was really fun. And so I just everywhere I went, anywhere that had a podcast studio, I showed up and I became known in these circles as the guy. And so people started asking me to teach them, hey, can you show me how to do this? So I started teaching classes, mostly for free in the beginning. And oh, it was so fun. That was just all I wanted to do. And then somewhere in there, I realized, look, this law thing is not going to work. I really don't like it. I didn't know what I was going to do. I did not see myself as somebody who could do what I do now. I just didn't see myself as that. My mindset still wasn't where it needed to be. I thought other people do that. People that went to school for that do that, right? But I'm at this party for a lawyer networking event. And one of the lawyers there just asked me, he said, I see that you're doing all this podcasting stuff. Do you think you could help me? Yeah, I'd love to help you. Client number one. I go to his
Bingo.
office. We make his podcast. I had a lot of fun with it. And I thought there might be something here. And I said, all right, I'm going to kind of try this out. I'm trying a lot of other ideas too, making even less money now that I'm starting to pull out of law.
Right.
And somewhere in there, my wife came to me with a, kind of a come to Jesus moment. Like, look, this baby we were talking about exists now. And the money was really tight. And she's like, look, I want you to chase your dreams. I want you to be happy, but we got to make our ends meet as well. And that's when I looked at what I was doing. I said, okay, I love this podcasting thing. I really love it. I'm going to take it. I'm going to really take a stab at it. And so I started trying to hustle that. I got a 9 to 5 at the bank in compliance and just started building this on nights and weekends.
Mm.
And it was just over 2 years it took me before I could quit that job.
Congratulations. You embodied the make a living from 9 to 5 and a fortune from 5 to 9, right? That's very, very cool. So you said it took just over 2 years. I'm sure that was quite the feeling at that 2 year mark, huh?
Yeah, it was wild. It was like I know exactly where I was standing when I just made the call on it. And it was March 2nd, 2020. I was making just enough. I wasn't going to replace my income. I was probably going to get about 50% of what I was making at my 9 to 5, but it was enough. Like I talked to my wife, it was enough. And we were trending up. And we all know what happened like within 2 weeks of
I
March
was going to
2nd,
say,
2020.
it's a heck of
I
a
don't know if
time.
yeah, for anybody that watches Arrested Development, I've made a huge mistake. That's what it felt like. Oh no. Thankfully, I mean, I think we all know what happened after that too. It worked out. Digital marketers, the ones that were good, saw a lot of good things in their business because all these businesses had extra money. They had this marketing spend. And for a lot of the clients I have now, they came to me because they had spend and some of them were very frank. Look, we have this spend. We lose what we don't use and we might get less next year.
Mm.
Some of them even bought extra from me before the year ended just so they could use their budgets. And I was like, this is amazing. I hope this never ends.
Really nice. Yeah. Something you never want to end, right? Yeah.
Right.
Hey, get extra at the end of every year. That's really cool. And yeah, it was a heck of a time. It ended up being a really good time for most of the digital world. So I'm curious from legal perspective, you're speaking to law firms here. Some of them are maybe dialed in with their lead generation. Some of them may be actually trying to find lead gen sources right now. So tell me, why is it that law firms should really consider having a podcast? Well, what's the importance of it?
I mean, I always go back to, Simon Sinek start with why. I always say, why are we doing this? Because there's a lot of different reasons to do it. Now, like I have a lot of clients that are injury lawyers, trial lawyers, and a lot of them are interested in nurturing leads. They have pretty robust lead gen systems, and they are using their podcast as a way to speak directly to those leads while they're in the funnel. Somebody shows up, they hit the website, they have questions. We know exactly what questions they have. They ask them in every consult. We've heard them all. And I mean, we see our SEO report. We know what people are searching before they land. And so we're making content that speaks specifically to that. We call it the FAQ model. What do people want to know? Speak to it. Grab an issue, talk about it. They should leave that. Shouldn't be that long. They should be able to leave that episode going, I feel better. Because that's really what we want. They're not going to do it themselves. I hear that sometimes. Oh, I don't want to give them too much information. If you're worried about that's not a client you want. That's what I tell people. If you're worried about them doing it themselves, like send them on anyway. And you're giving them just enough information that they feel better about their problem, but they feel better about you. You are the expert who explained it to them. They got to understand a little of your personality, maybe a little of your sense of humor. And they go, that's my person. I like that. I want to call them. Let's call them. And that's what you want. You want them on the phone because at that point, they're yours to lose. And then they sit down, you have a consult with them, they hear your voice again. They already feel like they know you. And now we're greasing the wheels a little. We're helping nurture that lead to a point where we can get them to yes. Because we all know if they leave, our odds of locking them after that go down. And then there's another angle that a lot of same people in the trial lawyer space use is networking and educating their referral sources. So Trial Lawyer Nation's a good example. Michael Cowan has had this podcast for years. He started podcasting close to the time I started podcasting. He's been at it a long time. So it's such a cool thing to be able to work with him on that. But he has a podcast where he brings on other trial lawyers. A lot of them he doesn't know already. So he's meeting them and networking with them. And they're talking about cases, breaking things down. How'd you do this? What happened? What happened with voir dire? What'd you tell the jury? So he's meeting these people, he's doing this, but then he's creating this listener base of other attorneys, a lot of younger attorneys that are eager to learn. Especially at the time when he started, there was very little out there like that. And so he's creating this listener base that loves him, sends him referrals, brings him co-counsel. He wrote a book recently and he drove a ton of sales because people talked about it on the podcast. Oh, I'm going to buy the book from Michael Cowan, of course. And that's another way we're doing it. So both of those start with, why did he do it? He did his for a different reason than somebody's going to do the FAQ. And then we work for large firms where they're doing a lot of thought leadership stuff. They're the first person talking about the thing. New legislation around AI. You're going to go to our podcast because we are some of the most accomplished lawyers on the planet working on this right now. And anytime something happens, we're the first to talk about it. And they build their following that way. And they become known as those people who do it. And when these big companies need help, whether it's M&A or whatever, that's who they know. They're driving to them. And this stuff works. It's really converting for clients across the spectrum. I believed in it from a very early time, obviously. Like I went all in, and it could have ended very differently because you don't know in the beginning, is this going to work? And most people, when something isn't proven, are going to tell you you've lost your mind. And maybe you have, because it's not like I could see the future. I had a feeling, thought it would work. I was into it, but that doesn't mean it's gonna. There's a lot of luck involved.
It's very interesting that you say that. And first, I just want to tip my hat to you for being willing to take the plunge and take the risk. Obviously, here you are. It panned out, right?
Well, part of
So
that was I really couldn't see my life working for someone else. It's just incompatible with who I am as a human. Doing things
yeah,
I don't like doing, day to day and doing
yep.
work like that. And then having to just take orders from other people like that. I was like, it has to work. If this didn't work, I'd have went somewhere else and done something else, but something had to work so I could be the person driving.
Welcome to the unemployable club. I get
There you go, man.
it. Yes, I understand. You're in control of your own destiny and you get to blaze your path forward. So I'm
Yeah,
I'm
win or
totally
lose.
on board with that. So I love the idea of starting with the why. And I think every law firm that's considering kind of that podcast marketing path, because there's a lot out now. It's gaining a lot of traction. I think they have to start the why. The common thing I hear is many firms want to try to make it happen, but the investment of time for them feels like a major endeavor. What would you say to that?
Sure. I think if they've already started doing it themselves, then I could see that because they had to learn an entirely new thing, figure out how to do it. Where does it go? How do we make it sound good? They bought a mic, it sounded terrible. And they're like, oh, every time they try something, it doesn't work. We all know what that feels like. We started on a new hobby and we can't even figure out why our thing won't stay. Oh, we don't have the right glue. You've got to buy this special glue that costs like $48. Like everything you do has, if you want to have quality in it, has all these little mistakes you have to make. And I get that. I made them all a lot. I mean, you should see, I'm really bad at throwing gear out. You should see how much gear is in that closet that I didn't need, but I bought and tried and didn't work, whatever. The learning curve can be pretty significant. So that time investment can be pretty significant. However, there's somebody recording us right now. If someone is doing it for you, most of your job is to show up and talk. And that is what a good agency is going to do. They're going to put you in a position where you understand why you're doing it, who you're doing it for, how this whole thing turns into money. And then you show up, you have a conversation, and that should be, for a lawyer, that should be close to the extent of what they do with this product.
Sure.
They're the voice. They should be able to walk away and it should turn into everything. And that's where I think a lot of the value lies. Is it's not just a podcast. Right now we're on Riverside. We're recording in high quality audio video on separate tracks. So now we can do a full-length video for YouTube. We can take that video that might be 30, 40, 50 minutes long, and when there's been moments that are really impactful for our listeners, we can clip those and put those in vertical, square, landscape, and use them all over social with captions and branding. And now people can engage with our content with low friction. They get to know us, get to like us, and go, I like that. Because when somebody sends you a podcast, you should listen to this podcast. Even if it's your best friend, you're like, oh, dude, I got a lot of those I got to listen to. But when you see a video, little short clip, you're qualified. You go, oh, I do like that. Like I remember seeing Julian Edelman's podcast clip
Yeah.
and thinking, I want to listen to that podcast
Right.
because it was funny. It was for me. They're talking about stuff I care about in a manner that I enjoy it. They're using salty language and not being buttoned up at all.
Yeah.
And now I listen to that podcast because I saw those clips. And that's one of the ways that we convert listeners and get attention is using those little clips because somebody will say, oh, I am struggling with that problem. And now they want to go find more about it.
I think that's great. And I totally agree with you. And the other thing I have to say about the firms listening that have a question about time and the time investment is exactly something that Robert said, which is how this turns into money. And if this is a legitimate lead generation source for you, then being willing to invest the time to build it out and build out that infrastructure. But Robert, for the law firms listening that don't quite understand how podcast equals money, can you draw that path for them a little bit?
No, absolutely. Let's go back to the first example we used of lead nurturing. We're spending that money on pay per click, SEO, billboards, whatever campaigns we're doing to drive those leads in. Those leads need to convert. We need to get them to pick up the phone. And that's one of the reasons we do content marketing in general. We are looking for a vehicle to speak directly to people, let them know who we are and make them feel good. Get them over that little bit of hump, that friction point to just set the appointment, talk to us. And I feel like every day that goes by, that path gets a little bit longer. They've got a lot of choices and there's a lot of content to compete with. But that's where I think that this medium shines. It's one of the only ways that you can really speak directly to somebody and feel really authentic. The videos have been around forever, and I think they can be really impactful. But let's be honest, how frequently are they really good? Do you see one of those videos with great lighting and the lawyer sitting behind their 900 books and they say something that you're just like, oh, that's great. And I understand why.
Mm.
There's so much pressure. You've got this $20,000 photo shoot and video thing going on. It's a lot. And lawyers tell me, I don't like being on camera. I get it, especially like that. Even though I encourage video like this, I found that when people are doing it like this, we're used to this. We're used to sitting down at our computer, having a conversation. I mean, COVID helped out a lot.
Sure
And
did.
being on the webcam, because that's what it is. It's not this high production value, nor does it need to be. Because we go back to earlier when you said time. They don't have time and they shouldn't be spending their time making a ton of content. They should sit down, they should talk, they should leave.
Mm.
And everyone else should do the work because that's what everyone else is good at. And so when we create that environment to make it easy, USB mic right in the side of the computer, put it right in front of you, have a conversation, and you're done. You're not wasting a lot of time. You're making it really easy. And so that way we're minimizing that time of the attorney. ROI is right there alone.
Mhm.
And then using that as a lead nurturing mechanism. And back to what we said earlier about where does it go? It becomes that podcast episode, becomes the video on YouTube, it becomes those video clips. It goes on to the blog. You put it on your website. So when people are looking for questions on your website, this is the resource. Here's the podcast where we answer your question and they engage with that content. They see what you have. They get to know you. They get to like you. They hopefully are starting to trust you a little bit after listening to a few episodes. And so there's that FAQ model, nurturing those leads, which is one of the most effective for people who are looking for a faster ROI. And now it's content marketing, but one of the beautiful things about it is you're building a lot of evergreen content,
Mm.
depending on the kind of show. If you are an injury attorney, a family law attorney, a criminal attorney, you are building massive content over years that will continue to serve you because not a lot tends to be changing. So some of that stuff is the day you record it 5 years later is still going to be good content.
Yeah, I couldn't agree with you more. And I think even that evergreen aspect alone is a big value add. So, where do they start? Where would you suggest, agency aside, where do you recommend a law firm owner starts if this is something they'd like to start pursuing?
Why? I mean, let's go back to why. And I don't say that to be silly. I really mean it. When I I would say 25% at least of the consults I get on the intake form, they don't really know what they want to talk about yet. They're not sure what is my podcast going to be about. And many of them have this idea that they're going to create a podcast about Topeka, Kansas and what goes on in Topeka. And they're going to talk to restaurant owners and they're going to do stuff at the town hall and it's going to be the Topeka podcast and people are going to love it. It's going to be so good. And then they're also going to be attorneys. And then when the people who listen to the Topeka podcast need an attorney, they're going to call us. And I don't want to make light of that idea because I think it's actually an idea that has legs. It is not an idea that is going to give you a ton of ROI up front. That is a long play. You are
Right.
building relationships in your community and you're going to spend a decent amount of money putting that show together
Mhm.
because you want it to have production value because it's not answering questions. People will put up with a little bit more if you're speaking directly to a thing that they are having pain about, which
Mhm.
is what almost all my podcasts do is we're speaking to a pain point and
Right.
people want to stop the pain. But not a lot of people have a pain point around what's going on in Topeka. Like that's more of a pleasure thing, right? That's oh, it would be nice to listen. Not I don't have to, it'd be nice to. And so now we're competing with Brene Brown and Joe Rogan, and that's really a hard place to compete
Mhm.
because we're asking for Saturday afternoon mowing the lawn time. We're asking for on the treadmill at the gym time,
Mhm.
driving to work time. That's precious time. There's every audiobook in the world, every podcast in the world is a competitor of ours now. And that's tough. It's really tough to compete in that space. And honestly, if you can compete in that space, why don't you quit your job? Come join me and do something different because that's tough. I think that it's a ripe area. I think it can be done well, especially if you have the right team on it.
Mhm.
But it is a long play. I have that conversation with people, and not one person yet has started the Topeka podcast that I've worked with. When we've had this conversation of why, what do we want from this? We almost immediately in the first 20 minutes discover what we really want from it and what a better avenue to get that will be.
This is great. I think this has been really, really helpful for the firms that are looking for that new potential lead generation source, looking for that authorship or celebrity source. I think this can really be a strong path forward for them. And I think you hopefully tackled and cut through a lot of the worries or concerns or identifying the why of that. I'm curious, what's got you fired up and excited today? Could be business, could be personal, could be both.
Oh man, I mean, it really is both. But at this point, I mean, we talked earlier just about growing up. I grew up in that rural community. I grew up in a mobile home. My parents had gotten us into a house by the time I was out of high school. Like they really did well for themselves. But I'm standing on their shoulders and the view from up here is better than I ever thought it could be. Like I get to come to work here. Like I sleep over there. I take my kids to school every morning. I get to come sit in here with all my toys. Like these are my toys. I would play with these and I did play with these before they made money. And
Right.
now I just get to have bigger, brighter, shinier toys and they all work. Like I've got a cockpit here and I have so much gratitude for what I get to do. I get to show up and do something I love. And now I have two beautiful little girls and I get to be the dad that I want to be. And
Amazing.
without question, like I don't feel like, oh, I'm not giving them enough time. I absolutely am. I get to be here for them. I get to go to their things. Right now, if you told me that I could have all this when I was 20, I would have said, amazing. Like I can't imagine anything better than that. That's winning.
First and foremost, again, a tip of my hat to you. That's really amazing. And I'm glad that you get to live the life that you want to live on your terms and you've built something really special for yourself. And I
Yeah,
just
I
also want to
appreciate it.
thank you for investing your time today and sharing some of your passion with the audience here and providing them some value. I think it's been amazing. What's the best way for them to get a hold of you if they'd like to reach out?
Yeah, lawpause.com. You can set an appointment with me right there. I'm always happy to talk whether you want to work on a podcast together or you just want to talk about a podcast or whatever. I was telling you off the mic, there's never a hard sell. I love what I do. I'm glad that you use the word passionate. I'm glad it comes through because I genuinely love what I do. It's a really fun thing for me to work on. And it's pretty incredible that I get to do this thing and provide value to the world while building a cool business at the same time.
Amen to that. And your passion certainly bleeds through. And there's no doubt the audience could hear it and see it depending on where they're listening or watching. And to the audience, thank you guys. Thank you for investing your time, for being here with us today. And look, if you enjoyed this episode, go show Robert some love down in the comments below. And depending on where you're listening or watching, make sure to hit that subscribe or follow button and turn those bell notifications on so that way you continue to see some awesome content just like this. But Robert, thank you again for your time today, and thank you for delivering such impactful content. I think this podcast marketing is something that's only going to continue to grow, and so I appreciate you sharing your knowledge on it.
My pleasure. Thanks for having me.